Imagine the cold silence of being left alone in your suffering, the kind of silence that screams louder than any words ever could. There was a time when you reached out, not for much, just a little understanding, maybe a touch of compassion. But what you received was something far colder. Indifference, mockery, silence. They let you drown in pain as if your agony were a nuisance. A passing storm they chose to ignore while they stood safely on shore. And as you sank, not one of them threw you a lifeline. Instead, they turned their backs and carried on with their lives as if you never mattered. Perhaps they even smiled. Perhaps they even told themselves you deserved it. But heaven saw. Heaven listened to the cries you never spoke aloud. And what they did to you did not disappear into nothingness. There is a quiet justice that walks with God, one that does not shout, one that does not warn, one that arrives not on our clock, but on His. And that justice is regret. Not the shallow kind that merely utters, "I'm sorry," but the kind that suffocates. The kind that wakes you up at 2 a.m. wondering how you could have been so cruel. The kind that replays memories not as triumphs, but as thorns. It is easy to be strong when you're the one causing the pain. When you believe your words hold power, when your silence is your weapon, and when your actions are coated in pride. But what happens when the tides turn? When the same waters they watched you drown in begin to rise around their ankles? What happens when there's no one left to care, no one left to pull them out? Pain has a strange way of remembering its birthplace. It returns, not always quickly, not always visibly, but it returns. And when it does, it never knocks, it simply walks in, carrying the weight of every tear you cried in silence. There are those who believe that what they did to you was justified, that your goodness was weakness, your forgiveness was foolishness, your love was dependency. But the day is coming when they'll wish they had held your heart more gently. They'll long for the very presence they once discarded. Regret is not punishment, it's revelation. It is the realization that what you took for granted was actually sacred. And this revelation is never painless. It is as if their own heart is now drowning in the very same storm they once ignored in yours. So if you're still wondering whether your hurt will be acknowledged, if you still find yourself looking at the past and asking, will they ever feel what I felt? The answer is yes, but not from your hands, not from your revenge, from life, from God. From the echo of every word they once used to cut you down. They may have celebrated your downfall, but they will never be able to silence the voice of regret that God places in the hearts of the arrogant. And this regret will not pass like a fleeting emotion. It will stay, it will linger, it will teach. Just as you were left gasping for emotional air, they will one day find themselves breathless. Not from physical pain, but from the heaviness of what they lost, of who they lost, and of how they let it all slip through fingers poisoned with pride. In the end, the scales will balance, not by your doing, but by God's design, and those who abandon you in your pain will be abandoned by peace in their joy. For every moment you are unseen, unheard, and unloved, there is a divine response being prepared, not in wrath, but in holy justice. You won't need to watch it unfold. You won't need to hear their apologies. The same God who watched you cry alone is the same God who will now let them feel every drop of the ocean they once left you to drown in. Regret is the sound of God's justice echoing in the soul of the one who hurt you. There are few torments on earth as haunting as the echo of regret. Unlike a punishment that strikes and leaves, regret resides. It lingers. It whispers long after the laughter fades and the damage is done. It is God's quiet justice, not rushed, not loud, but undeniable in its presence. For those who inflicted pain with indifference, regret becomes the invisible prison they carry inside their minds. Imagine someone who once stood tall in their pride, speaking words that sliced through your spirit without thought, turning away when you needed presence, scoffing at your tears as if they were nothing but a nuisance. In those moments they were kings and queens in their minds, unbothered, untouchable. But what they did not know is that heaven was watching, and heaven does not forget. Regret is God's reply in the form of memory. It is not vengeance, it is revelation. At first, it feels like a faint discomfort, a thought that creeps in during idle moments. Maybe I went too far. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. But over time, the thought becomes louder, more vivid. Suddenly, the past is no longer a badge of control. It becomes a mirror they cannot turn away from. God does not always strike the guilty with fire or thunder. Sometimes He allows them to keep living their life exactly as they planned, but removes their peace. And there is no torment more suffocating than watching your dreams unfold while your soul quietly crumbles under the weight of who you became to get there. The ones who hurt you may appear successful, they may seem happy, but regret doesn't always show on the outside. It lives in the quiet, in the silence of an empty room, in the moment when their laughter dies down and they're left with their thoughts. It visits when the world is done applauding, when the phone stops ringing, when the lights are off and the only voice they hear is their own, and that voice asks, "What if I hadn't done that to them?" You see, what they did to you is not just a part of your story, it is now a part of theirs. And in your case, it led to growth, endurance, and divine attention. But in their case, it leads to reckoning. They will look back and realize that in the moment they believed they were powerful, they were actually sowing seeds of future sorrow. They didn't just lose a person, they lost peace, they lost innocence, they lost the right to walk in full light without shadows creeping behind. Regret doesn't beg for attention, it arrives uninvited. And God allows it to arrive when they least expect it. Perhaps in the face of someone who reminds them of your kindness, or in a situation that reflects their own past cruelty. They will taste their own words, feel their own silence, face their own indifference, and it will not be sweet. Regret is not loud, it does not scream, but it breaks a soul from within, one small crack at a time. That is the sound of justice, not man-made, but divinely orchestrated, and no one escapes it. The same silence they gave you will become the silence that surrounds them. Silence is a language, a powerful one. It can offer peace or it can cause destruction. And when used as a weapon, it does not simply vanish. It circles back like an arrow aimed by time itself. The silence they gave you, those unanswered messages, the turning away in your hour of need, the refusal to acknowledge your cries, was never empty. It carried weight. It carried meaning. It said, "You are not important enough to be seen. Your pain is not worthy of a response." But silence has a way of multiplying. It begins as an act of ignorance, but it ends as a sentence of isolation. Those who refuse to speak life into you will one day search for a voice to pull them out of their own emotional graves. And they will find none, not because you wished it, not because you orchestrated it, but because God allows the same silence they weaponized to return as their teacher. There will come a moment when they need someone, not for attention, not for celebration, but for comfort. And the silence they once offered so freely will return, not from others, but from the heavens. Their prayers will feel unanswered. Their tears will find no witness, not because God is cruel, but because He is just. He does not forget those who turn their backs on the wounded. In the stillness of night, they will remember the moment you needed them, the call they ignored, the look they dismissed, the vulnerability they rejected, and they will wish for a different ending. But by then, the silence has already surrounded them, not imposed by others, but born from within. A silence that is not peaceful, but hollow. A silence that echoes with what ifs and if onlys. God does not avenge with fury. He often avenges with absence. And there is no absence more devastating than the one that mirrors what they once inflicted. The silence they now face won't be from lack of opportunity. It will be from the erosion of trust, the collapse of connection, the consequence of their own doing. This silence becomes their inheritance, the one they wrote when they dismissed your presence, your love, your need. Now they sit with it, not as power, but as punishment. And every quiet moment they face is a reflection of the moment they chose not to be there for you. And the beauty? You won't need to be near it. You won't need to hear about it, but they will live it, breathe it, and be shaped by it until they finally understand what it means to drown in silence. When they let go of you, they thought they won, but they let go of their own peace. There is a moment in the mind of every person who walks away from something good when they believe they've claimed a victory. It is subtle, buried under pride and self-assurance. When they let go of you, when they dismissed your value, they might have walked away with a smile, with confidence in their decision, even a sense of superiority. To them it seemed like a bold move, a power play, as if detachment was strength and cruelty was a badge of independence. But what they didn't know was that the very act of letting you go wasn't a sign of power. It was the beginning of their own quiet unraveling. Because in releasing you, they weren't shedding dead weight, they were losing light. They were walking out of warmth and into a cold they didn't yet feel. Your presence may have been silent, humble, even overlooked, but it was their anchor. And when that anchor was severed, so was their peace. At first, it won't show. Life might even seem to reward them. They may celebrate, feel free, take pride in the ease with which they removed you from their world. But peace doesn't leave all at once. It fades like a sunset, slowly, deceptively, and suddenly, without warning, the same things that once gave them joy now feel dull. The world looks the same, but it no longer speaks to them the way it used to, and they don't understand why. Peace isn't a possession, it's a gift, a divine atmosphere that surrounds those who live with sincerity, with kindness, with truth. It rests on the hearts of those who cherish rather than discard. And when they let go of someone they were meant to protect, cherish, or understand, peace begins its quiet departure. What follows is not chaos, not instantly. What follows is noise. Noise in the heart, noise in the mind, a constant hum of restlessness that no success can silence, no relationship can mute, no substance can numb. It is the whisper of the soul reminding them of what they once had and foolishly threw away. They might try to replace you, replicate you, or forget you. But peace cannot be mimicked. It cannot be bought or rebuilt through others. It was tied to you because you were God's reminder in their life, a divine presence clothed in human form. When they walked away from you, they walked away from a form of grace that may not return in the same way again. And this is what will haunt them. Not your absence, but the peace they once felt when you were near, the calm you brought, the understanding, the mercy. The kind of presence that does not demand attention, but whose disappearance screams louder than any words ever could. In the end, they will realize, letting you go was not a victory. It was not power, it was a tragic miscalculation. Because in choosing ego over empathy, in choosing momentary pride over lasting connection, they did not walk into freedom, they stepped into unrest. And that unrest is the price they must now carry. Your pain was never wasted. It became the weight of their future regret. Pain has a peculiar nature. To the one who carries it, it feels isolating, heavy, unjust. In the moment, it seems like nothing more than a burden, an unwanted guest that refuses to leave. But in the hands of the divine, pain becomes a seed, and what it grows into depends not on the one who suffers, but on the one who caused the suffering. When they hurt you, they thought your pain would dissolve, that it would vanish into the background like a forgotten melody. They didn't know that every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of questioning your worth was being gathered, not by you, but by the heavens. And what was being gathered was not just sadness, it was testimony, witness, evidence, not to condemn, but to echo back one day into their lives in a language only the soul understands. Regret. Your pain was never wasted. It was translated. It became the shadow that follows their brightest days. It became the question that haunts their victories. Did I break something beautiful? Your suffering, while unseen by them, became a mirror they would one day be forced to look into. A mirror that doesn't lie. A mirror that reflects who they were when they had the chance to be better and chose not to be. There will come a day when they are celebrated, when they are surrounded by others, but in the middle of applause, their mind will wander, not to their accomplishments, but to you, to the moment they could have chosen compassion, but chose cruelty instead, to the moment they could have protected, but instead became the cause of pain. This is how God works, not through thunder, but through memory, through the gentle conviction that grows louder with time, and that memory will not be a flash, it will be a slow burn. A realization that what they did to you is now inseparable from who they are. They thought they left your pain behind, but your pain became the weight of their own conscience. They will not know peace until they face what they did, and that facing will not come from outside, it will rise from within. Your voice, your silence, your sorrow, all of it will return, not as revenge, but as revelation. And when that revelation comes, they will understand the magnitude of what they did, not just to you, but to themselves. Because pain, when ignored by the one who caused it, doesn't disappear. It travels, it transforms. And in this case, it has become the weight of regret that they now carry into every future they try to build. It will sit with them in their happiest moments. It will remind them that their gain came at the cost of someone else's breaking. And no amount of distraction can erase that truth. God turns the tables by turning their memories into storms they can't escape. There is a sacred mystery in the way time and memory intertwine. Memory was never meant to be a curse, but for those who misused their time, mishandled the hearts of others, and mistook grace for weakness, it becomes just that, a storm that doesn't rage outside but within. When God begins to turn the tables, He doesn't always do so through visible calamity or public downfall. He does it quietly, intricately, through the power of remembrance. The ones who hurt you believed their actions would fade with time, that your pain would become irrelevant, that the details would blur and the wounds would close without ever touching them. But God, in His infinite justice, often uses memory as a mirror and a message, and when He's ready to speak, He speaks through the one thing they can never outrun, their own mind. They can change cities, change partners, change careers, but they cannot change what they did to you. And in the stillness of their lives, when everything looks fine on the outside, God allows their memory to become the storm, a storm that doesn't ask for permission. It starts with a thought, an image, a name, yours. It enters like a whisper and grows like thunder. They will recall moments they dismissed, words they spoke without care, the way your eyes searched for comfort and found none, the day they turned away when they could have leaned in. And these memories won't arrive softly. They'll crash like waves, not all at once, but again and again, and each wave will remind them, you were not just a phase. They were shaping their legacy with how they treated you. What they once justified in pride will now convict them in silence. The explanations they clung to, I was protecting myself, they were too emotional, they needed to toughen up, will no longer protect them. Because when God turns the tables, even the strongest lies collapse under the truth. And the truth is simple. They hurt someone who was sent as a blessing. These storms don't destroy their world, they reveal it. They expose the emptiness beneath their success, the hollowness of their relationships, the absence of true joy. Because when a person betrays someone they were supposed to protect, joy becomes counterfeit, love becomes fragile, and memory becomes the courtroom where the soul is put on trial. They may try to silence the past. They may surround themselves with noise, distractions, or even new people who never knew the damage they caused. But the soul doesn't forget. And God, in His wisdom, doesn't erase what should be confronted. He lets the storm rage, not as vengeance, but as transformation. The very thing they thought they escaped becomes the very thing that reshapes them, and all of it begins with memory. Not the kind that is nostalgic or sweet, but the kind that reigns, the kind that roars, the kind that wakes them up in the middle of the night, wondering where they went wrong and why peace never stays. And in that question, the storm continues. The absence they created in your life will be the absence they now battle with. There is a deep irony in the nature of absence. When they created space between you and them, when they removed their presence, their voice, their concern, they believed it would leave a void in your life, and perhaps it did. At first, perhaps you cried not just from pain, but from confusion, because the people you trusted, the ones you never imagined life without, became ghosts while you were still breathing. But what they didn't understand is that absence is not a one-way street. The same space they carved out in your life is the same space that begins to form in theirs. Except when it comes for them, it doesn't come quietly. It arrives with weight, with silence that is not peaceful, but deafening. And this time, it's their turn to ask the questions. Why do I feel so alone? Why does something feel missing? You were not just a person in their life. You were a presence, a light, a safe place. The kind of presence that doesn't demand much, but offers everything. Kindness, patience, understanding, forgiveness. And when they withdrew from you, they weren't just walking away from a relationship. They were severing a connection to something divine. They may try to replace your presence with others, new faces, new conversations, new experiences, but nothing fits, nothing feels right, because true presence can't be replicated. and what was once given freely can't be forced into a substitute. They'll laugh, but feel a strange hollowness afterward. They'll celebrate, but it won't taste the same, because absence follows them. Not because you cursed them, but because God allows the soul to feel what it once inflicted. This absence isn't about missing you. It's about missing what they were when they were with you. The version of themselves that was softer, more genuine, more human. They will come to realize that in creating distance from you, they also created distance from the better parts of themselves. And no one teaches that lesson better than time. Over time, they'll revisit the gap they created, and they'll wish they had filled it with understanding instead of judgment, with humility instead of pride, with love instead of silence. But by then the absence is no longer something they can control. It becomes a constant, a shadow that stretches across their days. They may reach for things, relationships, achievements, even spiritual practices to fill that space, but nothing lands, because the space they once created with such confidence now belongs to their own regret. And that space is not just empty, it's haunted. Haunted by kindness they didn't return, by love they didn't honor, by peace they didn't protect. And as they sit in that absence, they'll understand what they created in your life is now the very thing they cannot escape in theirs. They thought you were replaceable, but God will prove your worth through their emptiness. To the blind eye, what is sacred can appear common. That is the flaw of the human heart, darkened by pride. It sees treasure and treats it like stone. When they hurt you, discarded you, or treated you as if you were just another face in the crowd, it was not because you lacked value. It was because their eyes were too clouded to see it. Their soul had not matured enough to recognize what stood before them was not ordinary. It was a divine presence wrapped in simplicity. They thought you were replaceable, that someone else could offer what you gave, that your kindness, patience, loyalty, and compassion were commodities found anywhere. And in this dangerous illusion, they let you go without remorse. Perhaps they believed they could do better. Perhaps they believed you were too easy to mistreat. Perhaps they never paused to question what your absence might cost them. But God, in His great design, is never mocked. He does not let the sacred be dismissed without consequence. And what follows your departure from their life is not a smooth continuation. It is a slow, aching emptiness, a gap they cannot name, a hunger they cannot feed. They will try to move on, to fill your place with distractions, pleasures, or new relationships. But none of it will soothe the restlessness that now inhabits their soul, because what they thought was replaceable was actually rare. You were the calm in their chaos, the understanding in their storms, the quiet loyalty in a world full of shallow promises. And these things do not appear twice, not in the same form, not with the same heart. And when they search for you in others, they will find echoes, but never the original. And that is how God will prove your worth, not by lifting you up to show the world, not by announcing your value through grand gestures, but by allowing those who fail to see you to live with the haunting realization that they once held something extraordinary and let it slip away. They will remember you in strange moments, during laughter that feels empty, in the eyes of someone who almost gets them, but not quite, in the silence after a long day when they realize the one person who truly understood them is gone. And in these moments, your worth will speak louder than it ever did before. You won't need to be there. You won't need to speak a word. Your absence will say everything. It will echo through the spaces you once filled with grace. And while they sit with the shadows of what they once had, you will rise. not in arrogance, but in divine purpose. For what God values, he restores. What man discards, God reclaims. And what they thought was replaceable will become the very thing they cannot live without. You were not weak for feeling pain. You were not foolish for showing love. You were not less because they treated you as if you were. You were rare, and they will learn this not through your words, but through their regret. The same way they let you drown in silence, confusion, and sorrow, God will allow them to drown in the weight of what they've done. Not as a punishment, but as a revelation. This is divine justice, not wrapped in fury, but in truth. God will not raise his hand against them. He will simply remove his peace. And when peace is gone, even the most beautiful moments lose their light. They will feel the echoes of your absence louder than the noise of their achievements. They will crave the purity they once called weakness, and they will ache for the warmth they once mocked. So walk forward, not with vengeance in your heart, but with quiet confidence in your soul. For the same God who saw your tears in secret is the one orchestrating their awakening. And when the tables turn, you won't need to watch, because you'll be too busy rising into everything they said you'd never become. Let regret teach them what your presence tried to show them. You were never ordinary. You were the blessing they weren't ready for.